Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 33rd year, in fact, winding up our 33rd year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished, what they might be planning. It's a wider net than simply writing, however. We have had on musicians, we've had on sculptors, we've had on painters. So if you have an idea for a writer who might be a good fit for the Writer's Block or another brand of artist, send in your suggestions using the address that appears at the end of the show. We'd love to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that comes out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. It's a valuable Cape Ann service for the community and everybody interested in local news and the arts and sciences. Don't go with Dish or other ways of getting access to the internet. I'm not supposed to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Stick with cable, stick with the Writer's Block. I'm happy to say tonight we do have a guest, a distinguished guest, one of the most important people on Cape Ann because she is the editor of the Gloucester Daily Times. She's a widely experienced writer and widely experienced editor. And as the editor of the Gloucester Times, which position she took in June, the GDT, the Gloucester Daily Times, appropriately wrote a story. I'm going to read the first paragraph of that story as part of my introduction. Managing editor Andrea Holbrook has been named editor of the Gloucester Daily Times, replacing outgoing editor David Olson. In this role, she will oversee the award-winning publication's talented reporters and photographers and all aspects of the daily digital and print report. Andrea Holbrook, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thank you for having me.
I'm honored to have you. You are one of the most important people on the Cape because you edit our one and only newspaper.
Yes.
To get the audience to know a little bit about your background, can you tell us where you're from originally, where you went to school?
I grew up in Andover. I went to Andover High, where I worked on the school newspaper. I then went to the University of New Hampshire, where I was an animal science major, biotechnology. So I wanted to be a vet, but my grades were good, but it's very, very difficult to get into vet school, so I needed a backup plan, and I was a very good writer, so I took some journalism classes with Don Murray, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial writer while I was there. I worked on the school newspaper. I was the editor my senior year, and when I got out of school, I applied to a lot of vets, and I applied to some newspapers. And my first job was at the Eagle Tribune in Lawrence, and I started out as a reporter. I've been on the copy desk. I was the page one editor. I was the night editor. Then I came to Gloucester.
So the Eagle Tribune lucked out when the vet community lost you.
I guess, but and then there came a time where I was like, it took me 10 years to pay off my student loans, and I was like, do I really want to go to vet school at like 35 and start all over? And I said I really liked journalism, and kind of have a passion for it, so I decided to stick with newspapers.
Stuck with it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, because not all our audience understands how newspapers are created, what you do as the editor of the Gloucester Daily Times on a daily basis? What's your day like?
What's my day like? I wake up in the morning and I get my email on my phone and I scroll through my phone to see if there's any breaking news. If there's anything breaking, I will call my reporters and say, get out on it. And then I truck myself here to Gloucester from home, look through my emails again, look through AP, to Associated Press to see what's up, post anything that needs posting right away to our digital platform. There are a lot of stories on our digital platform, especially world nation type stories that don't appear in the print edition just because there's not enough space, there's no room. Then we have a meeting, talk about what we think should be the most important stories of the day, what we should focus on.
And who's at the meeting?
That's myself and my two reporters.
Two full-time reporters?
Yes, and we actually do a Zoom call with the Salem News staff because there's sometimes a lot of crossover. And my main reporter, Ethan Foreman, who covers Gloucester, used to work in Salem and Peabody, and they have a new reporter over there. Mm-hmm. So there's an exchange of, here's who you can call for this story kind of thing, and I'll get that story, especially ones covering lawmakers because we share a lot of legislatures stuff.
So this is a kind of a modern mixed meeting with some live people and some people on screen.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, the reporters go out and make their phone calls, do their job. I decide what's going to go on the editorial page, columns, letters. We kind of, as a group of papers, we're part of the North of Boston Media Group, share editorials. So there'll be some talk about what the editorial of the day is going to be for all the papers use almost the same editorial every day. And then I get down to it and start editing stories as they come in, or write some sometimes.
What's the toughest part about editing a story that comes in from a reporter?
Every word is gold in their view. There's every word is precious. So, sometimes changing things, they're really, and that's okay. I mean, it's their writing, their name is on it. But there are times when you're just like, this doesn't work, or some writers have a certain style and they'll bury the real nugget of news in the middle or even at the bottom, and you're like, this is the news here, it needs to be moved up, and kicking it back and making them rewrite.
Are they mostly cooperative?
Oh, yes.
And understanding?
Yes. Some are more understanding than others.
Yeah, human nature gets in the way.
But I'm lucky right now. I have two very experienced reporters. Ethan's has been in the business for over 20 years, and my newest reporter, Stephen Hagan, has worked for multiple news outlets in Massachusetts. He's done some work for, I believe, WBZ and WGBH. So he's coming in, and he just started right at Thanksgiving, and he did a little freelancing for me before that, and he's hit the ground running.
Good. I know that feeling of thinking your words are golden. I got over it. It's more common with
every reporter has to get over that.
Yeah.
There's always going to be an editor that says no.
Yeah. And they will look at something that they wrote a year earlier and say, "Oh yeah, geez,
yeah.
How did I push that to the third graph?" Yeah. Well, by the way, when's the deadline for getting the stories in from the reporter, and when do you have to have them to the people who are going to lay it out?
Well, we asked the reporters to try and shoot for a 4:00 deadline, which seems pretty early, but that gives me time to edit them. And then they get copy read by a copy reader. And then our print deadlines are 7:30, 8:30, like for breaking news.
So
like on an election night, I can go right up to 8:30, but I have to have it at 8:30. I can't, which can prove difficult because the polls close at 8 o'clock. So
at 8 o'clock, there's no way out after that.
No, so what we try to do is get all the inside stuff done first, and then sports, and then have the front page and the jump pages, the last pages to go, so that if something does break, those pages are still live, and we can get something in at the last
So did you
minute.
leave a hole there? Or,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I should say for our audience, a jump page is when a story is referred to, please go to page 5.
Page, yeah,
and it's
exactly.
likely on page 5.
Right.
Uh, Have there been any stories that were kind of memorable or striking that you've dealt with as a reporter or as an editor?
Well, I was lucky when I was working at the Eagle Tribune. I was on 2 Pulitzer Prize winning teams. The first one was the Willie Horton story. I don't remember. I don't know if you remember. During the campaign for president when Mike Dukakis was running. Willie Horton was a career criminal who had murdered a boy in Lawrence and been supposedly put away for jail for life. And at the time, Massachusetts allowed, after a certain period of time, prisoners to go out on supervised leave. Well, he escaped on one of these leaves and went to Maryland, where he raped a woman, broke into a couple's home, raped the woman, had tied up the man. They eventually escaped, and he was eventually caught. But it was a huge uproar about how was somebody who was supposed to be in life even allowed out at all on these supervised leaves. And the Massachusetts Corrections Department didn't have a lot of answers at the time, and we chased the story, and we ended up, it led to a lot of prison reforms, and it also led in part to the Corey Act, which is the Criminal Offenders Record Information Act that allows people to get information on criminals and keep track of them.
And of course, it was used by the Bush campaign.
Yes,
effectively against,
and pretty
our
much
governor.
sunk Mike Dukakis during one of the debates when he was asked, what would you do if it was your wife that was raped?
I remember that well.
Yeah.
And he was very soft-spoken about his response and very rational. He should have blown up and said, that's an unfair question. And it would have thrown that debate back the other direction.
I didn't do any of the writing on that, but I was on the copy desk at the time, and they wanted one person to read all the stories, and I was that person. So I got the first read, and I had very many arguments with one of the editors about that. So, and then the second one was our second Pulitzer Prize was when, for breaking news, was when 7 boys went in to rescue a friend that was crossing the ice in the Merrimack River. And 5 of them, I believe 5 of them died, might be 6.
I don't remember
that. It was a big news story at the time. One of the boys, they were all under 12, I think. And one of them decided to cross the ice, and the ice broke. And the other ones all tried to make a chain to get them, and they all went in the drink, and 5 of them died. Oh. It was a pretty big story for the Merrimack Valley.
I don't remember that. Yeah, must have been a huge story. What that was in the 80s?
No, it was the 90s.
It
Might have even been might have been 2000s, early 2000s. Because it was before I came up here, and I came up here about 10, 12 years ago. Started working in Gloucester.
Those are good, interesting stories. The national, profound national story,
Yes.
and you're a Pulitzer Prize winner. You are. Don't take what they give you.
Yeah.
And
well, I didn't write that one, but I did the page. I was on the desk then doing the page 1 design, and I was supposed to be on vacation, and they called me in to do the front page.
You were part of the team.
I was part of the team.
Good.
And we had argument over that one about the use of the photos, because our photographer was on scene and got photos of them pulling the kids out. And that was one of the dilemmas, because it happened on a Saturday. They would be in the Sunday morning paper. Did we want to show kids in distress in the morning? And there was a big argument, because at that point we already knew at least 2 of the kids had died. And it's like, okay, we don't know which kid is which in the photos. And it was a big debate.
Messy
but we decided to use the photos because they really told the story.
And that the Pulitzer was for that prize, the drowning of the boys, not the Horton story.
They both were. We won 2. Yeah, we won
I
two.
bow down to you. Two Pulitzer Prize.
It's a great team over there.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it was, yes. Thank you for sharing those. I'm going to go down. I've got some other questions I want to ask you because it's such an opportunity to talk to genuine newspaper editor. We are in now the 400th anniversary year of Gloucester as a kind of non-indigenous European entity.
Right.
How is that going to affect your job? Because it's really almost a cottage industry for a year and will probably continue for a while after. How does that affect your
Well, we're
job?
already starting to, we've already put out some stories on the 400th. We'll have a slot on our webpage that'll be kind of down page, but it will be all stories related to the 400 will be down there, so that anybody who wants to find out the latest can go to the 400 section, and all the stories will be
you're going to
there.
have a section then?
Yeah, on the webpage.
On the web, okay.
On the webpage.
Some of the stories in print have that 400 logo.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So they'll all be in this one section on the webpage. We're going to preview events. We're going to cover as many as possible. We're going to try and get one story in each of our. We published the Cape Ann magazine also. We're going to try and have one 400th. We plan to have one 400 story in each edition.
Each daily edition?
In each of the magazines.
Oh, the magazines, yes.
In the magazines. And we'll see what happens.
You'll be busy.
We'll be busy.
As many are already.
Yeah.
Or many were, I should say, because
It's pretty much planned out, right?
Yeah. A lot of planning's gone into it already.
Yeah.
You mentioned a topic before we went on the air that I didn't know about. It has to, but it came up into my mind again when you mentioned wanting to be a vet. You still have a love of animals, I know, because you said you ride. Yes. And you have owned and cared for horses. Yeah. Where did that horse racing love come from? Or horses in general?
My grandfather was a handicapper, and he also used to, when you went to the track, you used to be able to rent binoculars at a stand if you didn't have your own. And my grandfather owned the binoculars concession at Suffolk Downs and Rockingham Park. And when I was a little kid, there were enough tracks that you could spend the whole year on the road going from Scarborough, Maine, down to Florida, Hialeah. And he was on the road a lot when I was a kid.
So he had
doing
concessions
that.
at all the north,
Well, he worked,
the summer and winter tracks?
He worked for a company called Clocker Lawton, which used to do handicapping at all the tracks. So he traveled, I think, mostly as a handicapper. I don't really know. I just know that in the mornings on Sundays, sometimes we would go up to Rockingham Park, and he would clock the horses in the workouts in the morning to do his handicapping, and then he'd take us to Canopy Lake Park. And so I think I got my love of horses from him.
Was that the entry to your desire to be a vet?
Yeah. I always wanted to be a vet. He gave me my first riding lessons when I was 12. When I was 14, the Aleppo Shriners used to keep their parade horses in Andover. And I went to the barn one day and said, if I do some work, can I ride? And I would go every day, ride my bike, pick out one of the horses' stalls, groom it, and ride it during the week. And I would get it ready for parades on the weekends. And that was kind of, my mother never worried about me getting into any trouble because she knew I was at the barn. So I did that all through high school, basically. So
you clean up the horses and comb the tails and brush their mane.
Shampoo them, clean all the equipment, spiffy for parades. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
And then I did want to be a vet. I got very interested in it, and that's what I went to school for. I'm still very interested in it, but learn something new every day in the barn.
Yes, indeed. Horse racing is another industry like print journalism that is
Struggling, shall we
struggling.
say?
Yes, that's good. Facing challenges. Yes. Well, I could tell you're an editor, and we don't want to say it's dying. It's not dying.
I don't think it's dying. I think it's changing. And I think journalism is changing a lot more than racing. We've gone into digital platforms. There's multimedia. There are a lot more ways to reach people with the news than just print.
Yes.
And I think even though print may be struggling, I think that there are other options to get your news out there.
So the Gloucester Times has an elaborate website, elaborate digital presence,
Yes.
even though it's had to drop a couple of its daily editions.
But we do have editions on Tuesdays and Saturdays that are digital. If you go to our platform, if you're a subscriber, you can get a password to the e-edition, which looks like a printed paper.
Yes.
And we actually put out an 8-page digital edition on Tuesdays and
Yes.
Saturdays. And a lot of that news in those 2 digital editions doesn't appear in print.
We subscribe,
Yeah.
so I don't read papers digitally too often. I grew up with print
Right.
and a lot of newspapers, and I still
The smell.
living in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, the smell. Yeah,
The smell of the ink.
you get newsprint all over your fingers. It's wonderful.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Everybody knows, I think, that the print industry and journalism has changed radically with the introduction of the internet, and even before that because of television news. What important things has it lost? And then I'd like to move into where it might be going.
I think one of the biggest impacts has been people don't read the way they used to. A lot of people do read on tablets. They don't. Print is very expensive. To print a paper is very expensive. Trees cost money. Print.
Yeah.
One of the biggest costs, I think, for newspapers is actually buying the paper to print on.
The big rolls,
big giant
huge
rolls
of newsprint.
And I think especially with the COVID pandemic, one of the other revenue sources for the paper is advertising. And if businesses aren't doing well, they're not going to pay for advertising.
Yeah.
And that money isn't there to fund the reporters' work. And I get this a lot, especially on Facebook. We post stories on Facebook in hopes that people will subscribe either to, we have a paywall, which means that you get 10 free clicks online before you are asked to pay for it.
Yeah, most newspapers have that now.
Yes,
Catching on.
People are like, why do you post these stories? Why aren't they free? Well, because we have to pay people to write these stories.
Yeah.
Journalism, unless you're like a big shot, isn't like a very extraordinarily well-paying job. You really have to love what you do, but you can't ask people to do the kind of work that reporters and our photographers do for free. And you have to pay them.
I've actually heard people say, looking at a print newspaper, there's too many ads in here. Why do they do that?
Well, that's why.
That's the business side.
Right.
Without the ads, there's no
newspaper.
Where is journalism, and to make it more specific and more concrete, where's the Gloucester Times going to be in, say, 2020?
I hope we're still. I hope we still. I hope we still hear our parent company, CNHI, which is based in Alabama, is owns chains of newspapers and is dedicated to keeping them running. That's one of the reasons we went to the 2 digital pages, is we wanted to keep the newspaper running during COVID, and it was a way to save some money by not printing on those 2 days and keep the paper viable.
Will the Times keep its present 4 print days for a while, do you think?
For a while, I hope. And there's talk of recession, but we're hoping to go back to print all those days. That's the hope.
To go back to a full 6?
The 6 days.
I didn't think that was even on the table. I thought it was
It
just a question
is,
of
but
keeping what's left.
But if it acts, I don't know. I'm not the editorial department is kept separate from advertising, and I don't work with budgets. I have a budget for my freelance people, and that's about all I know on the money side of it. But that's the hope. The hope is to go back at some point to 6 days.
It's good to know. I had not heard anybody, even City Scuttlebutt, talk about going back to full 6 days.
We hope to. So we'll see what happens.
Well, that'd be wonderful.
Yes.
That'd be wonderful. We're almost out of time. This has been a good half hour. Very briefly, if you had to advise anybody who likes to write, who's thinking of journalism, you don't have to be serious on this answer. What would you advise them to do?
My journalism professor, Don Murray, he said one thing was that news organizations want people with experience. It doesn't matter so much the degree. So if you have the opportunity, write for your school paper. As I did. Even maybe take a job doing obits or doing calendar jobs, easy jobs, because that will get your foot in the door and lead you to better things. If somebody comes in my office and wants to do some writing for me, I'll let them and give them some opportunities, give them some advice. The other piece of advice is learn how to engage with multimedia. Be a competent photographer. Know how to use Facebook, Twitter. Some of the a lot of people are using Instagram now, because as a reporter, you want to get your stories out there. You want to get them read, and the way to do that is through multimedia.
That's good advice. I know some people say, if you're thinking about going to journalism, don't. But your advice is very excellent.
Well, that too, but
I want to thank you very much, Andrea Holbrook, editor of the Gloucester Times, for being with us and sparing some time to share your insights into the newspaper industry and the nuts and bolts of writing. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank our TV audience as well for being with us on this program with Andrea Holbrook. If you've learned something about journalism and where it's been, where it's going, then the Writer's Block has done its job. I hope to see you again next year, because this is our last season show of this year. I hope to see you again next year on the Writer's Block. Good night.